Mm-hmm. All right. So from the last video, I wanted to talk about another experience that I had with changing my mindset, changing the way how I saw my reality and the immediate results that I got. So a couple of years back, this was during maybe just before the pandemic, and during the pandemic actually, I used to go all the way into town, which it would be like maybe like a 20-minute drive from where I am to get vegetables and certain types of produce, right? And because it's town is always parking is always kind of hard to find in that particular area, especially like more so like mid morning time, right? And well, anytime, because even earlier in the daytime, like let's say people go to the market around, let's say, 6 o'clock, right? It it's usually full around that time as well. I when I'm driving down, I used to have a difficulty finding a parking spot, and I realized that, well, now and back then too, I realized that the story that I was creating was that parking spaces were hard to find, and that I wouldn't, or I would have difficulty finding a spot. So I think back then I was listening to Bashar, one of those, and it gave a reminder of actually either speaking it into your reality or thinking it, right? Thinking or having positive thoughts about the stories that you are creating. So, like, I actually, in that moment, in that time back then, rewrote the story of parking spaces being difficult for me to find to every time I go into town and I think the thought of seeing an empty parking spot, I would find a parking spot. So I basically would send a thought of imagining myself driving up to the parking lot and having an empty spot available for me. And I would let it go and just trust. And when I got to the spot, every time after that, even if I go there and a spot isn't available, I never dropped in my faith of finding a spot. Like, even if I waited maybe like I had a time I waited about, I think, 3 minutes the most, and somebody came, two people actually, right? Two cars left, so I had two spots to choose from. And yeah, I was reminded of that um, earlier this week as well, again, as um, one of the stories that I actually transmuted, and there are many more. And again, reminders of these internal stories that we play out inside of our in our own minds, right? And it creates these reflections of realities that basically regurgitate through our back into us, basically. And if we take them on, depending on our responses or our reactions to these external materializations or these external circumstances that happen, we there's a very real possibility of us actually um, allowing for these external circumstances to basically influence our um, continually influence the story that we create within our mind, right? Where we then reconfirm the story as being true. But if we change our story, our internal belief, right? I call them stories uh, for the purpose of this series of videos. When we change the story, what happens and what I've noticed is that there's a delay reaction, or well, a delayed, um, yeah, because our thought realm is much faster than the material world, right? The material world is basically slowed down light, and science is getting is I think they've yeah, recently I was reading an article and they were talking about actually materializing or using light to create physical matter. And so then that goes into the realm of even like you would see in Star Trek replicators, right? Food replicators and all that. But essentially, hold on. Right. Where was I? So essentially there is a connection between our thoughts and the physical reality, even in what they are discovering now about light and matter, right? And how again our thoughts as the observer is capable of altering the um this very same light or matter, right? It's just it materializes in all kinds of ways, but I can talk about that in another video based on my personal experiences on that. But um so yeah, so one of the really good techniques to actually experiment with and try out is next time you're going to a place where you have to park, where parking may be a bit difficult, change the story in your mind if you haven't already, right? Because I know some people, they already know that, they don't even worry about a parking spot, right? But if you are worrying about a parking spot and you sometimes some people have anxieties about it, right? Especially if you're living in densely populated areas, you can practice changing your story, changing the internal story, and actually seeing that um, you have to basically let go and not have an emotional. After you let it go, right? You 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 have to be emotionally good with or without the external result, right? And I found that that was when I actually then materialized the empty parking spot. But if I had a bit of wavering or doubt, maybe it was a bit later when I went into town, um, where it was easier for doubt to set in. That's when I found myself having to wait maybe 3 minutes or so for a parking spot, right? But I didn't allow the circumstance of not finding a parking spot immediately when I turned up to waver my belief in the new story that I had created for myself, right? And my reality. And again, this can be applied to anything in our lives. Of course, some things would be a bit more difficult. For example, money, or for some people, uh, romantic relationships or finding a partner. Uh, Depending on, again, I think the emotional charge that is involved there. And there may be some things that would have to be shifted or cleared internally, right? For you to actually uh, lessen or actually make the materialization a lot easier for it to be attracted into your life. So I thought I'd share that insight and that story of um, being in the market and finding a parking spot. So yeah, we'll make another video soon about a couple other things.